In the 1920s, flappers were making waves in society by defying the expectations of their time. They rejected the restrictive clothing and societal norms that had been imposed upon women for generations. They embraced shorter skirts, bobbed hair, and an overall more carefree and independent lifestyle. But for one woman in Ireland, this was not enough. She would take her fight for women's rights to the most unlikely of places, the winner's circle of a dog show. Majoris Hannah Sheehy Skeffington was born in Ireland in 1879. Her father, William Sheehy, owned one of the largest breweries in Dublin, and Majoris grew up with every luxury one could imagine. From an early age, she became involved with the Irish Women's Franchise League, an organization dedicated to achieving voting rights for women. In 1908, she married Francis Skeffington, a fellow activist who shared her passion for social justice. Together, they had 4 children and continued to work tirelessly for the advancement of women's rights. However, when World War I broke out in 1914, things took a turn for the worse. The British government saw the war as an opportunity to further suppress dissent within Ireland and crack down on the burgeoning women's rights movement. This meant that Majoris and her husband, along with other activists, had to go into hiding. During this time, they faced constant fear of arrest and imprisonment as the British authorities sought to silence any opposition to the war effort. Despite these dangers, the couple continued to work for the cause, organizing protests and speaking out against the government's oppressive policies. In 1916, the Easter Rising, a pivotal moment in Irish history, occurred. A group of Irish Republicans led an armed rebellion against British rule in Dublin. However, the uprising was ultimately crushed and many of the rebels, including Francis, were executed. This devastating event left Majoris a widow with 4 young children to care for. But instead of being deterred, she redoubled her efforts in the fight for independence and women's rights. In the aftermath of the Easter Rising, the British government implemented even more stringent measures to control the population of Ireland. Public gatherings were banned and the press was heavily censored. But undeterred, Majoris and her fellow activists found new ways to organize and protest. They knew that the only way to bring about real change was to keep fighting for it. One of the ways they did this was through nonviolent civil disobedience. They organized boycotts of British goods, staged public protests, and conducted acts of civil disobedience, such as the famous 1917 Irish Women's March on London. During the march, which was organized by the Irish Women's Franchise League, hundreds of Irish women made their way to the British capital to demand the right to vote. They were met with hostility and violence from the police, but their bravery in the face of adversity shocked the nation and brought the issue of women's suffrage to the forefront of public consciousness. But as the war continued and the casualties mounted, the British government became increasingly desperate to maintain control. They turned to propaganda and censorship to sway public opinion in their favor and suppress any dissenting voices. This meant that those who fought for Irish independence and women's rights had to be even more creative in their methods of protest. It was during this time that Majoris Hannah's gift for organization and leadership truly shone. She helped to form the Irish Women's Workers Association in 1917, which aimed to improve the working conditions and pay for women working in Ireland's burgeoning industries. She also played a key role in the Irish women's peace movement, which called for an end to the war and a just peace settlement. These organizations provided a platform for women to make their voices heard and to fight for the changes they wanted to see in the world. Through these groups, women could organize, mobilize, and make tangible change in their communities. They could also provide support and resources to those who were struggling, such as the many families who had been torn apart by the war. Mayoras Hanna's dedication to these causes was unwavering. She was arrested and imprisoned numerous times for her activities, but she never wavered in her commitment to the cause. Her bravery in the face of adversity inspired others to join her fight and made her a symbol of resistance against the British government. As the war drew to a close and the future of Ireland hung in the balance, Mayoras Hanna's work became even more important. She helped to negotiate the first truce between the Irish and British leaders in 1921, and she continued to work for a peaceful resolution to the conflict. Her efforts ultimately led to the establishment of the Irish Free State in 1922, which granted independence to 26 counties in the south of Ireland. Throughout her life, Mayoras Hanna had been a tireless advocate for peace and reconciliation. She believed that violence was never the answer and that dialogue and understanding were the only way to achieve lasting peace. This belief was put to the test when the Irish Civil War broke out in 1922 between those who supported the Anglo-Irish Treaty and those who opposed it. Mayoras Hanna refused to take sides and instead worked to bring the warring factions together. She believed that it was possible for the Irish people to come together and build a better future for themselves and their country. Her efforts were not always successful, but she never gave up hope. After the Civil War ended in 1923, Mayoras Hanna returned to her work with the Irish Women's Franchise League and the Irish Women's Workers Association. She continued to fight for the rights of women and workers, and she remained a vocal critic of the government's policies until her death in 1946. Throughout her life, Mayoras Hanna had been recognized for her contributions to the fight for Irish independence and women's rights. However, there was one honor that she had been denied: the right to vote. Even after the Irish Free State was established in 1922, women still did not have the right to vote in national elections. Mayoras Hanna continued to campaign for women's suffrage, but she knew that it would be a long and difficult battle. Undeterred, she decided to take matters into her own hands. In 1923, Mayoras Hanna and her friends came up with a plan to defy the government and assert their right to vote. They would enter Westminster Hall, the seat of the British Parliament, and take their places in the public gallery. This was the highest honor that could be bestowed upon any member of the British public, and it was traditionally reserved for important figures such as visiting heads of state. However, the rules of Westminster Hall were very clear. No women were allowed in the public gallery. On the day of the protest, Mayoras Hanna and her friends dressed in their finest clothes and made their way to the hall. They entered the building and made their way to the public gallery, where they were met by a group of burly male ushers. The ushers tried to prevent them from entering, but Mayoras Hanna and her friends refused to leave. They sat down in the gallery and began to make themselves comfortable. This caused a commotion in the hall. Members of Parliament began to shout and scream, demanding that the women be removed. But Mayoress Hannah and her friends remained defiant. They sat in the gallery for hours, refusing to leave until the MPs finally agreed to let them stay. This was a humiliating defeat for the MPs who had never before been defied in this way. It was a major victory for Mayoress Hannah and her friends, who had proven that they had the right to be heard in the highest seat of government in Britain. News of the protests spread quickly throughout Ireland and Britain, and Mayoress Hannah and her friends became known as the Women's Platoon. They had shown that they were not to be intimidated and that they would not be silenced. The government was forced to take notice of their demands for the right to vote, and eventually, women's suffrage was granted in 1928. The night a woman defied the West's cruelest tradition. It was hard to believe that such prejudice existed in today's modern world, but sadly, it's a reality for millions. Join the movement to end female infanticide. Click the link in the description to learn more. And thanks for watching.